McQuestion for over 28 years, talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McQuestion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, the Hatton W. Sumner's Foundation, helping to educate the public about the fundamental principles of their democracy and thus be in a position to help formulate public policy. Moss Adams LLP, certified public accountants and consultants, providing industry-smart tax, assurance, and consulting solutions to help businesses and their owners succeed since 1913. The University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future.
This program is part 2 of a 2-part series on how the CIA and FBI covered up many of the facts about JFK's assassination. The truth about what happened when Oswald visited Mexico City, for instance, is still unknown. One of the things we'll discuss is the leadership of the CIA's counterterrorism unit, Jim Angleton, and how his fingerprints are all over bad government policies, including covering up important facts about the assassination of President Kennedy. We'll also take a look at recently released documents and why they're still not complete. So let's meet our panel, starting on my right. Dave Perry has been researching the Kennedy assassination since 1976. He's published various articles, provided research to Vince Bugliosi, among others, and he is my favorite and Hugh Ainsworth's favorite conspiracy debunker. Dave, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Dennis.
I don't know what you're going to debunk about this guy, but we'll see. We'll see if we can find something. Jeff Morley is a veteran Washington journalist who's been writing about the JFK story since 1983. The editor of the JFK Facts blog, he's an author of 2 biographies which explore the CIA's role in the events of 1963. The one that you're about to see a picture of is The Ghost, The Secret Life of CIA Spy Master James Jesus Angleton. And he wrote one called Our Man in Mexico, Winston Scott and the Hidden History of the CIA. His JFK journalism is collected in an ebook entitled The CIA and JFK, The Last Assassination Secrets, and in 2009 he was awarded the Penn Oakland Censorship Award for his JFK reporting. So Jeff, this is part 2, and so why don't you give that viewer just a little brief background of what we covered on the first part and bring us up sort of to the end part of Mexico City.
Well, so the story that hasn't been told, or not, I think not fully emphasized enough, is the CIA's interest in Oswald before the assassination. And this isn't a theory, this is now well documented from declassified CIA records and interviews with retired CIA people. And this interest, which goes from November 1959 to November 1963, culminates when Oswald goes to visit Mexico City in early October 1963 and runs into a series of CIA surveillance operations which prompt the CIA station in Mexico City to contact CIA headquarters and say, who is this guy Oswald? So at that moment, all eyes in the CIA are on Oswald. And this is 6 weeks before the assassination.
Okay, before the assassination. Now we talked about the idea that the CIA had surveillance down there. They were obviously tapping phones and all that sort of thing. And one of the questions that you were sitting in the audience in that program, Dave, and you were going to ask Jeff some question about Mexico City and how this works. So why don't you ask him that question now?
Well, basically, eventually all the transcripts, I think originally the CIA claimed that they didn't even know Oswald was in the Cuban embassy at the time. We now know that that is inaccurate, to be kind. But we do have a series of transcripts, recordings, where the CIA was using a fellow by the name of Tarsov to translate all of the recordings going back and forth between the Cuban and the Russian embassies. And there is one very curious one. Oswald went to the Cuban embassy. They told him to go to the Russian embassy. At the Russian embassy, he was turned down. He could not get a visa to Russia. He came back to the Cuban embassy and told the woman there, Sylvia Duran, it's okay. The Russian said, give me the Cuban visa. She's sharp enough to call the Russian embassy. They say, no, he's lying. So now he's in trouble with them. She kicks him out. The the council comes out, asks you, and kicks him out. So now he knows his trip to Mexico City, either to get to Cuba or Russia, is in vain. That's all said and done. Curiously, he's wandering around Mexico City now with nothing to do, about to leave the country. And there is a transcript by Tarsov where a woman and a man call the Russian embassy. Since it appears it was done by the CIA, you would expect this would be a tap of the Cuban embassy. The woman would be Sylvia Duran, and Oswald would be the man. And during the course of the conversation, he says things like, you know, I was there yesterday, which my response would be, yeah, we threw you out. Well, I was over there and I left some information. Where do I live? Is that, in essence,
what's my address? And it's a very curious conversation for a number of reasons. It ostensibly comes from the Cuban consulate on a Saturday. Oswald had arrived on a Friday and been turned down. The Cuban consulate wasn't open on Saturday, and Sylvia Duran said she didn't work on Saturday. So it's not at all clear, and this person doesn't know Oswald's address. So the suspicion is that neither of those people were who they said they were. So it's unexplained. Also, it's worth noting that we only have the transcript. We don't have the tape recording itself. Now, at the time, the CIA had the Cuban consulate completely bugged, and so they created tapes constantly of all conversations. The story that was fed to the Warren Commission was that that tape was erased before the assassination. But Wynn Scott, the station chief, his assistant, Ann Goodpaster, told me in an interview here in Dallas in 2006 that there was a copy that survived after the assassination. So there was a tape with somebody's voice on it. Maybe it was Oswald's voice, maybe it was somebody impersonating Oswald's voice, but that tape has never surfaced.
All right, so we're still missing a tape, among other things. I've never heard of tapes missing, but nevertheless, I guess it's
and I think part of the idea here, this is my opinion, is that this was the CIA had lost track of Oswald. And eventually he left the country. At that point, as far as I'm concerned, the CIA in Mexico City or wherever should have notified the FBI that Oswald had returned to the United States. And we also, through the release of these records, found out that there was another person who happened to be a Texan who the CIA, his name is Eldon Henson, the CIA completely infiltrated his life when he came to Mexico City to talk to the Cubans. And when he returned, they immediately notified the FBI and he was arrested.
Interesting.
It's a very important story. Eldon Henson came down and offered to sell arms to the Cubans, and he called up and the Cubans said, get lost. The CIA overheard the conversation. They called him back. They said, we're from the Cuban embassy. We don't talk about these things, but come meet us. And so they go to meet in a hotel, and Henson says, I want to sell arms to your revolution. The CIA is writing it all down. That's very interesting. They send him back to Texas, and they immediately notify the FBI, and Eldon Henson gets arrested. That's interesting in itself. So you see how CIA impersonation operations work. But what's really interesting is the whole account of that Eldon Henson operation later turns up in Oswald's file.
Well, I'm going to mention one thing, which I haven't mentioned before, and you don't know about this at all, but we did a bunch of programs on this in the 40th anniversary, which was, would that be 2003? And my wife happened to have found a used book, because she likes used books, and she found a book written by J. Evetts Haley called, was about something about Lyndon Johnson. Skinny book, Lyndon Johnson, written in 1964.